The following program was produced by Blue Ridge PBS and PBS Appalachia in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education to share resources for parents on problem behaviors like vaping and e-cigarettes, teen gambling, and opioid use.
Hello and welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. Last year, Americans lost a record $55 billion in casinos and on mobile gaming apps, over 13% more than any previous year. The growth of sports betting and the arrival of casinos in the Commonwealth does represent a huge opportunity for revenue generation, but for some gamblers, the allure of big money can become problematic. My guests today have been tasked by the Commonwealth to help those with gambling addictions, and today we'll be talking about problem gambling in general, and specifically how parents can be alert to the signs of it in their children. Ann Rogers is the Problem Gambling Prevention Coordinator, and Don McCourtney is the Problem Gambling Recovery Coordinator with the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. I'm so thankful that they've taken the time to visit us here in our studio. Welcome to both of you. So glad to have you here, and I know so little about this that anything I learn is going to be great. But before we start, I'd just like to kind of ask people, how they got into this kind of work. And Ann, I'll just start with you. What led you to this kind of work?
I've been doing this work for 25 years, not particularly to gambling, but in prevention and public health. I started off in more like substance use and mental health issues and have moved into gambling addictions and trying to prevent gambling addictions as well. So it's been sort of a progressive, and it all sort of runs together.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, the connections there are between substance use disorders and gambling addictions. Don, how about you?
I've actually been working in the field of substance use disorders for the last 44 years. And unfortunate enough, I'm in recovery myself from from alcohol addiction since 1974. And I've been a therapist, I've been a CEO, and spent 20 years working in Las Vegas, Nevada, and that's how I learned about gambling addiction, as you can imagine.
Sure, and so you've got unique insight when you meet someone who has a problem to recognize what those are. Virginia didn't used to be legal to gamble in Virginia, right? So let's talk about that history. I know in 1973, charitable gaming was first allowed, and then we had the lottery created. How has it changed since you started in this work, and where are we now?
So really, this is brand new for Virginia. Not gambling per se being brand new, but these our positions and the work that we're doing is brand new. It used to be that Virginia, with the lottery and stuff, they did not put any money into prevention, treatment, or recovery services. But when they passed the legislation back in 2019 and to have sports betting and casinos open in the state, they built in some funds for problem gambling treatment and support services. And support service would be prevention and recovery. And so they wanted to start with prevention to try to mitigate some of the issues that would occur as more gambling opportunities grow. There'd be more likelihood of people suffering problems. And, when you have access and availability increasing, you have problems that'll increase. So we're trying to, hold that down as much as possible.
And in my opening remarks, Don, I talked about, the growth in the money lost. 13, I don't remember what the number was, a large number to just in the last year alone. What is your sense of how the arrival of, the opening of a casino in Bristol and now in Petersburg, I believe, there's one coming? Portsmouth. Right, and there's another one coming in Danville. Mm-hmm. So are we seeing, because of this greater opportunity, do you think we're going to see a boom in problematic gambling as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when you take a look at the, one example is Mississippi, as they put more and more casinos in, they started to have greater problems with problem gambling, as well as the pieces that's associated with it, violence, substance abuse, spousal abuse, arrests, because it tends to be a part of the whole dynamic that goes along with problem gambling.
And you know, these problems have been going on. This isn't the Commonwealth's fault, right? I think it's we're codifying it a little bit. You talked about some of those problems that exist. I want to jump to the idea of problematic gambling as a disease, like we think about other addictions as a disease. I know that it is in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Doctors. So I just want to go through some of the things that the DSM-5 says are signs of problematic gambling and get your thoughts, both of you, so feel free to jump in. So the first one that they list is a need to gamble with increasing stakes. Mm-hmm. Don, this ties in nicely, I think, with other types of addiction, that it takes more to get the same result. What do you know about that?
That's called tolerance. And when, to get the same effect, you have to have a greater amount of a bet. Your bet increases from, let's say, from $5, now it's $25. It's not uncommon. Some of the people that I've worked with spend an entire paycheck. I know of one lady, for example, who went due to an accident, obtained about $2 million from the accident. Within 5 years, the $2 million was gone. And so you can, as she became further and further into the dependency of the gambling, her amounts went up.
And Ann, I'll throw this to you, that the next thing that they indicate is a restlessness and irritability when not gambling. What does that look like?
Well, think of it this way. If a person were drinking and they stop drinking, they start having these cravings, and they start thinking about when are they going to go to the bar next. Same kind of thing. They're restless and irritability. Their brain is functioning the same way as if they were an alcoholic, as in they're wanting that dopamine fix. And so they're constantly thinking, okay, when can I gamble next? What am I going to gamble on? You know, how much might I earn? How much might I lose? And they're constantly thinking about it, and it causes anxiety basically inside of you. And that's what they're feeling, that edginess and need to have to try to gamble, and it's all stemming from their brain.
That's actually called withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you wouldn't think that a person who didn't put the substance in their system would experience withdrawal, but they do. And like Ann was saying, it's kind of like Pavlov's dog, that anticipation, and I can't have it, and that anticipation increases.
And it's also like we all can only pay so much attention to one thing. So if we're paying this much mental attention to that, mm-hmm. to gambling or whatever else, we might be addicted to, it means we're probably ignoring other things in our lives as well.
Right.
Right, and with kids, that means their grades tend to be lower. They may have more physical fights. Same kind of issues that they may have with substances.
Right. Repeated unsuccessful efforts to stop.
Mm-hmm.
That's loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just, I've tried, even though you've tried and tried and tried, you think you're going to stop, and you
Exactly.
just have proven that you're unable to. Another sign is, I think this kind of goes along with what you're saying, a preoccupation with gambling, where it's what you think about, right? Mm-hmm. More likely to gamble when stressed. What does that look like for people who are suffering?
Well, it's really a coping mechanism. It's a way to escape stress, however you want to define it. Go out and gamble, then I don't have to pay attention to whatever I'm stressed about. Plus, as Ann was saying, the dopamine, the serotonin, the norepinephrine, that all increases as they gamble, and that prefrontal cortex has this release from those chemicals, and you don't feel the stress because you're busy interacting with the machine or the table or whatever you're doing.
It would be almost like people who get stressed might eat more. So instead of eating more, they gamble more.
Sure. And this one feels unique to gambling, and it's the idea of chasing losses. Mm-hmm. What is chasing loss, and what does that look like?
chasing losses, okay, you lost this money and you think, okay, well, the next one's going to be a winner, or the next one's going to be a winner. And they're always trying to win back what they lost, and they keep losing more. And even if they do win back what they lost, usually there's such a dopamine hit from it, they think they're on a lucky streak now, and so they can keep gambling more.
It's not walking away, right?
Right.
That's correct. And there's a thing called mistaken beliefs by gamblers, and there's hundreds of them. And that's one of the mistaken beliefs, that this time it'll be different. That somehow magically, and with problem gamblers, they have their superstition, very superstitious, in kissing the dice and certain time of the day, certain table, certain machine, and what happens is that's a part of their mistaken beliefs, that somehow this is going to work better because I have a personal relationship with luck. And we don't have a personal relationship with luck, but that's a part of the mistaken beliefs.
Right. And those who are operating the gambling systems understand that much better than the people. Some of the people, a lot of people do. A lot of people they go to Las Vegas, they have a budget, they spend some time at the tables or the machines, and then they go to a show, and then they come home and they've had a lovely vacation.
Right.
Right. It's not a problem for everybody, clearly.
About 4 to 5% of the population that gambles will be addicted to gambling.
Okay. And I think with all kinds of addiction, lying, is a huge one. So lying to who are problem gamblers most likely to lie to?
Well, the spouses, and sometimes it's overt lies, and sometimes it's covert lies. I worked with a guy, for example, that was a vice president of a casino when I was in Vegas. And because his background was finance, what he would do is he took care of the finance of the family, including the 2 children's college funds. When things fell apart, because the wife was looking at the college fund, and there's supposed to be thousands of dollars in there, and there were hundreds.
Right. And obviously that leads to we got 2 more of these things in the DSM-5: job loss, relationship loss, opportunity loss. It's really just loss, right? Giving things up.
Right, and I mean, it's because you're, with the loss that occurs prior to that, the person is, they can't be dependable. They can't be depended on anymore. They're not acting as a partner. They're being very deceptive, and so that creates the problems in the relationship.
And then the last was just using other people's money, right?
People, once they start to have a problem with gambling, they don't have any, money has no value. See, for problem gamblers, the substance is the money. If it wasn't for the money, they couldn't gamble. So they lose, most of us see money as prestige, paying bills, safety. Problem gambler, that just goes away. The money is just for one reason only, and that's to gamble.
Yeah, and they start borrowing more from family and friends, or taking,
shifting things around and all of that, and that goes back to many of these other things that we just talked about. One of the reasons I called you both is that Blue Ridge PBS has been tasked by the Virginia Department of Education to work with families to help parents understand what problematic gambling looks like in kids. So.
Could I say one other thing? Because as we're talking about the symptoms, one of the things that's important is to understand what the gambler's fallacy is. Because sometimes people, when they don't understand that, they don't get the idea, how did this happen? The gambler's fallacy is the idea that somehow past events will influence future events, even though we know they're not dependent on each other. And it's like we're flipping quarters, you and I. I flip heads, I get heads, you get tails. And after that quarter's hit 8 times heads, you're going to increase your wager going, no, that quarter is going to hit tails eventually. Has to. And it's going to be this time because it's already had 8 heads. Well, that's not true. If that quarter is an honest quarter, each time you flip the quarter, it's a 50-50 chance. And that's what hooks and keeps the problem gambler going, because that gambler's fallacy, somehow it'll be different this time. Somehow I can beat the system.
Right. I understand that. I know, and as someone who doesn't have a mind that works that way, it's hard for us, right? We assume it's a moral failure.
Right.
That's what's different about gambling. Have you come across that where people think, they're a bad person because of this, and it's not necessarily about morality, right?
No, it's nothing to do with morality. It's just something that a person went into because they thought it'd be fun, just like playing another game. It's just now there's a little bit of money involved. Or for kids, it might not be money. It might be their shoes. It might be a piece of clothing that they're gambling. But, it starts off being something fun, but then it ends up not being quite so fun.
And the courts by the way, they treat the problem gambler than they do the substance use disorder. They treat them much differently because when they end up in front of the courts, it's usually because of financial reasons. And that's where the morality thing comes in. And the ADA does not protect a problem gambler like they do the substance use disorder. So there's two significant things that happen for people who have a problem with gambling versus substance use disorder.
And but it's a stigma issue, much like it is with opioids or anything else, right? We think they're bad people. Right. Mm-hmm. And then we treat them differently because it's not like but your brain has been rewired, right? Because in the same way that it is with other kinds of addiction. So I do want to talk about kids, because this is new. What kind of access do kids have to legal gambling and gambling that might not be legal?
So in the state of Virginia, almost all the gambling is 21 and over. Lottery is 18 and older. And horse races are 18 and older, but everything else is 21 and older. And unfortunately, kids have easy access because you've got machines in stores. Sometimes people aren't checking the IDs in some of the convenience stores like they should be to make sure the person's 18 and they're purchasing lottery tickets. You have these skill gray machines that it's still gambling.
These are the machines that we see in convenience stores that aren't in casinos.
Correct.
And we could do a whole show about the legality of those and the controversies surrounding it, but they are everywhere.
They don't have the protections around them. So casinos have a pretty good protection in there. They're checking IDs, they're getting in there. The Rosie's checking IDs. But on the internet, sports betting, you can easily say you're at whatever age you are. So you can bypass that pretty easy. The machines that are in those convenience stores, a lot of them, if you take a look, and I've seen this myself, that person doesn't look like they're 21 to me, but they're sitting off to the side and people are just gambling in them and they don't have any way to check age. And so they're not getting the protections really that they need.
The sports betting really interests me, and I don't know, Don, what your experience is with this, but are we seeing kids who are online sports betting on their favorite teams or on others who shouldn't be doing that?
Absolutely. We know that the age group, particularly the 18 to 27-year-olds, that's their favorite game. And because of their age, and many of them are in college, I mean, it gets they get right down to the minutia of the sports betting.
And you could bet on almost anything. I hear the ads on the radio, how many points are scored, but also how many times does this person touch the ball, or many, many other
What's the next play? And who is he going to throw it to wide out? Is it going to be a run? I mean, it can get to that minutia.
Yeah, as well as the fantasy sports and everything else that tends to attract the younger people. And statistically, from a survey that was done in 2021, it's your freshman males, your 15, 16-year-old males that tend to have the higher rates of people in high school that have gambled in the past year, which is, you would think it would be the people that are seniors, but it's not. It's actually the younger
kind of something
age.
They try, and then some of them stick to it, and some of them probably stop doing it.
Yep.
Right.
What are some signs that parents can look for? There's so many things we have to be worried about our kids doing. But what are some signs, Don, that if you're concerned, you think your kid is not, maybe there's a problem here, what are some things you can look for?
They may withdraw. It could be financial. They're always trying to borrow money from you, and they're working, or you've got a set amount you're given, and they got an excuse why it needs it this time and this time and this time. The withdrawal is where they could actually be and sometimes gambling addiction is called the hidden addiction. And so they can withdraw to the room, play on the machine, on the computer, on their phone, and parents don't even know that. So part of it's withdrawal, irritability, because they lost.
Hard to tell if you're teenagers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the symptoms are very similar to other things that you would see. You know, they might start missing school. They, their grades are dropping because they're preoccupied with that.
Similar to what a substance use disorder type of symptoms that you'd see that you'd have with someone. You can't smell it, you can't see it, and you can't hear it. So that's different. But as far as the type of stuff we're talking about, yes, it's very, very common.
You know, my computer got stolen,
Yes.
kind of things, right?
Right. Or you find stuff missing. You wonder what happened to that favorite handgun you had. It's gone, and you don't know where it went. Or maybe you have some coins, and they're gone, and you don't know where it went.
And I guess it's just the conversations we need to have. What are some conversation starters? We probably have parents who are watching this at home and saying, gosh, I don't know if this is a problem for my kid, but I've noticed this and this, but how do I start that conversation? I don't want to, ruin my weekend. I don't want to do this. What are some conversation starters we can have with kids?
You know, even before the conversation starter, which is important, no question, is that very few parents will bring home a quart of booze to a 15-year-old, put it in front of him and says, let's share this together. But the parent may bring home a lottery ticket and give it to them or several of them for a Christmas gift. And so that's giving them permission and telling them that gambling is okay to do. And I'm not either for or against gambling. No, that's not the issue. But what it does, when you start, we know through statistics, is that people who start gambling earlier on in life tend to develop a problem later on in life.
And I guess before the issue arises, there are things we can probably say to even elementary school kids, right?
Exactly. One of the things is if let's say they have a lottery ticket and they win something, that actually sets something off very early in their brain. And so just kind of broaching it about, this being for adults and the reason why it's for adults, because adults can be more responsible with their money and setting a budget and talking about, all the pieces that are necessary to move that forward. But just bringing up, that this is a lottery ticket and maybe trying not to do it in front of children.
Sure. And there's opportunities. I'm in the convenience store, and let's say there's a gentleman off to the side we've all seen this behavior. Somebody who's just scratching, and then buying more tickets and scratching. That's a chance for me to say to my child, I don't want to say anything bad about that guy, but did that seem strange to you?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've talked a little bit about the safeguards that are in place. Is there a role for schools in this, school principals, school teachers, to help kids understand probability and statistics, or the other things that might lead them to question gambling a little bit?
Yes, and there's actually a law that passed last year to try to get problem gambling addiction presented in schools along with the other addictions so that kids understand it. They need to be taught about financial wellness and being more responsible, and how to what it can do to your brain and how it can impact your decision making, kind of what stuff you were talking about.
And that financial wellness, that's a part the parents could actually talk to them. This is what healthy spending is about. This is why we save, and this is why we do the things we do with money for these reasons. So we have a house. So it's basically how do you handle money, and how is money important?
Right. We've got a few minutes left, and charitable gambling we haven't really talked about, but a lot of schools have their own raffles, 50-50s. Do you see those as being problematic?
So it can be an issue with some people. It can be a trigger for other people who may have a problem with it. But I think one of the things to do is, make sure that they've contacted the charitable gaming group, which is within Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, to get their license so that they can do this.
Because you can't just do that, right?
Right, you're not supposed to do it.
Right.
You need to follow the rules. And make sure you offer something with the helpline information on it, because if somebody who has a problem sees it, or somebody who's already in recovery sees this stuff, it could trigger them, and get that helpline out there, offer it to everybody who may be participating in that raffle.
Do you have any thoughts on charitable gaming in schools?
Well, unfortunately, is a way for the kids to see this behavior that we're telling them it's not really, we don't want them to do that behavior, and so we're saying one thing and doing another, and that sometimes that hypocrisy, kids pick that up.
Right. And yet again, it is a teachable moment, right? It's a
Absolutely.
chance for a math teacher to say, hey, guess what? There's the raffle. How many tickets do you think are bought? How much money
Right.
do you think you'll get?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are school counselors prepared to, are there any resources for them? Do you feel like they're prepared or ready? I can see this coming to them first.
I don't feel prepared. But
Most clinicians, whether they're school counselors or private or public, they just don't have the skill sets to deal with problem gambling. And I can go on and on the reasons, but they just haven't had the training.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I think we could talk about this a lot more.
Yes.
There's a lot more to do, and maybe we'll have you back or do additional things about this in the future. But we are out of time, and as the show comes to a close, I'd just like to thank both Ann and Don for sharing their knowledge on problematic gambling. If you're concerned about yourself or a loved one, I encourage you to reach out to the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling hotline at 800-522-4700 or visit vcpg.net. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.